Welcome to the Three Times podcast. Today I'm talking to David Oliver, a name that many people will be familiar with thanks to his long history and unmatched enthusiasm for involving the community in making music. This episode is in two parts. In this one, we talk about how David came to love music and how he founded the Hexham Village Band, a community band that regularly plays at ceilidhs. We then get well out of our depth with a discussion that touches on the sociological power of music. Regular listeners will know we like to introduce ambient sounds whenever we can to prove this is not some AI-generated fantasy. Today it's the creaky chair. Keep your ears peeled for those special moments. In the second episode, we will talk about why music is an inherently important thing, the state of music education, and the obstacles that people face when they want to make music for themselves. This episode will be released shortly, so please subscribe to make sure you catch it. So, David Oliver, thank you for joining us on Three Times podcast. Can you summarise your musical activities at the moment?
Yes, at the moment, there are two main things. I have a ceilidh band called the Hedgehog Skin, which is based in Hexham here, where I live. It consists of people who are all from a tiny little corner of the west end of Hexham. And we play for ceilidhs, band dances, weddings, parties, public events. We play traditional jigs, reels, hornpipes and waltzes and slow airs from this region, from these islands and from some other parts of the world, but in that order. So we're a Northumbrian, traditional Northumbrian dance band. And the other main thing that I do these days is the same sort of music, but I run a thing called the Hexham Village Band. I know that Hexham is not a village, but the concept of the village band is whoever happens to be available and wants to turn out when there's some sort of a gathering, a harvest festival, or I don't know, a visit from friends from overseas, for instance, when there's an event in Hexham or around here where some traditional music can enhance it, then the Hexham Village Band is available. And the ethos of the village band is it's open to anyone. There is an age restriction. You've got to be over 16. There are good reasons for that. Anyone over the age of 16 who plays a portable acoustic instrument can join the village band. So portable and acoustic, because we want to be able to rock up and play anywhere. We're not dependent on electricity. There's no fuss and faff with anything except playing the music. We don't read music. We learn by ear and play by heart, so that again we don't worry about music stands on windy days and anything like that. And there are no auditions. There's no attendance register. If people want to come, they come. My job is to make it enjoyable enough and worthwhile enough for people to want to be there.
That sounds like a challenge.
Well, yeah, but the village band started when I was encouraged by some local friends to have a folk music opportunity for adults, because there were plenty for youngsters. I could come back to my involvement in folk music for young people. And so I sort of let it be known through pub sessions and just contacts people I know that I would have at core music, which you and your listeners probably know about, I would have a free taster session for a folk band for people 16 and over. And I thought we might get 8 or 10 people turn up for that event one Saturday morning in January 2011. So about 30 people crammed into a room in core music. We had a great time, played tunes for an hour and a half, and we agreed we wanted to keep it going. So 2 weeks later we started again, and we've met every Saturday since then, except sometimes in school holidays, but usually we go through the school holidays as well. So that's, I've given you a much longer account of the village band than the Hedgehog Skin, but those are my two things. So if you like, I've got a professional ceilidh band and a community ceilidh band.
Yeah. And what's your story? How did you start your interest in music and get to where you are now?
My childhood contained nothing whatever to do with traditional music. I was brought up in Sunderland. My father worked at what was then called the Technical College, and he and my mother were from the south. My mother's from Birmingham, I call that the south, and my dad was brought up in the London area. Although he was born, usefully to me, he was born in Belfast because his dad was working in Belfast at the time he was born, which makes me an Irish citizen, which is very useful these days. Anyway, sorry. But my dad was very musical, but it was what we might call serious music. He was a church chorister, a paid chorister and bass in Portsmouth Cathedral Choir for a while before his work brought him to Sunderland. He was very, very keen on opera and on parlour singing and so on. And my mother's family were musical as well. Her father particularly was a wonderful tenor. So when she got engaged to a young man that was a bass, her dad was so delighted they could sing duets together and so on. But it was what we would call classical music or serious music. And so I had violin lessons, I learnt the piano. In my family, it was just taken as a given that you had to learn the piano. I seriously just assumed everybody had to learn the piano, and you weren't allowed to learn another instrument until you'd had piano lessons. So I wasn't very assiduous at practicing, but I had piano lessons, and I joined the church choir, which was a wonderful musical education. Tuesday night, Thursday night, Sunday morning, Sunday evening, singing hymns, psalms, anthems in a beautiful place. I didn't realise it at the time, but I mean that is just such a fantastic way to learn music. And I played the violin and then later the bassoon in the Sunderland Youth Orchestra. It was never very good, but good enough to fit in. When I left school I had to give my bassoon back, and I've never touched one since. So at the age of 18 I was a reasonable bassoon player. I loved the instrument, but I've never been able to have one since. And then I went away to university to study English at Leeds University. Okay, that's a turning point for me musically. So should I carry on from there?
Yes.
So I scraped in, it's true to say, to the English department at the University of Leeds, and was looking for somewhere to live. And about 3 days before I was due to go down to the university, we'd arranged some digs in some suburb of Leeds for me to live in. I got a phone call from the warden of a small remote men's hall of residence called Saddle Hall on the outskirts of Leeds, far from the centre of social and academic activity. This man, yes, it was a small all men's hall. He was from the northeast. He'd gone to university in Newcastle. He was 10 years older than I was, so he's in his upper 20s. And while he was at Newcastle University, he joined a team of sword dancers called the Newcastle Kingsmen. In the days he was a student in Newcastle, King's College was part of Durham University, the Kingsmen, and they did a thing called rapper sword dancing. And on my first Monday night in Saddle Hall, where he was offering me a place, the new men, the freshers, were asked to come into the common room after supper. So we thought there's going to be a welcoming speech, or there's going to be a sherry reception or something like that. We sat there waiting, and then suddenly this rapper team burst in. Now, people who've seen rapper dancing can imagine the impact. It's very dangerous, it's athletic and gymnastic and complex and fast and absolutely exotic. In my life since then, I've seen sword dancing and folk dancing of various kinds from all over the world. There's nothing as exotic as Tyneside rapper sword dancing. And like in those 4 or 5 minutes that those men were dancing in front of us, like 3 or 4 yards away from us, my Well, yeah, I mean, scales fell from my eyes. I've sometimes compared it with St. Paul on the road to Damascus. It was just a life-changing moment. I just looked at these men and thought, I want to do that. I played football for my school team. I played the guitar in a rock band by that time, as well as the classical music. So Ernie Kirkby had seen someone who was interested in stuff, and I and one or two others joined the rapper team, and it became a very important part of my life at university. So attached to the rapper team, there were folk bands, and we moved on to doing various kinds of clog dancing and Morris dancing and so on. But rapper was always the thing. And I often say I got my degree in the English department, but I got my education in Sadler Hall, and particularly with the rapper team.
Yeah.
What
kind of year was this?
1967,
Right.
October 1967 I started.
So this is kind of the heyday of folk rock, but shortly after the purer rock, purer folk, I mean, was popular.
That's right, yes. I mean, the Dubliners were, if you like, were popularising folk, and the Dubliners were a really good band. They weren't kind of playing for commercial, trying to get commercial edge on it. They were just a great band.
Yeah.
And they and others, and of course Joan Baez and Bob Dylan were getting into the charts.
Yeah.
Some people would, well, that's a particular kind of folk music. But yes, it was becoming, it was getting there. And then as those late 60s, early 70s rolled out, there were bands like Pentangle and Steel Eye Span.
Fairport Convention.
Fairport Convention. Yeah. So, and bands like the Waterstones, Martin Carthy, Norma Waterston and her family, people knew about them. They didn't get into the charts, they weren't interested in that, but people knew about them and actually slowly began to realise how good the stuff was.
Yeah.
But for me, this music was all about going to international festivals and without wanting to exaggerate it, we would drink beer, we would mix with girls, it was socially, it was great. But it was, I think the dance was so exciting to do, and that was what I really loved. So I did this dancing, became a school teacher, got a job in Gosforth in Newcastle, and with what turned out to be quite a smart move, although I don't think I thought it through at the time, I decided to try and get a rapper team going at Gosforth. It was a grammar school, and I spoke to the captain of the boys rugby team, and I told him what a great time I'd had as a student through this music and dancing. I mean, he was a rugby player from Westerhope, and he'd never heard of any of this stuff. But I persuaded him to bring a few mates along. We started a rapper team, and gradually that grew. And gradually we drew other men in, other young men in, and then later introduced country dancing, so there was for mixed couples, so that girls started. I always think if I'd started it off as a country dancing group, we probably wouldn't have got those lads. It was because this dance was so masculine, so physical, that we were able to do it. And if you're in the rugby team, as you know, Steve, you don't need to prove your macho qualities. They're taken.
Well, I did. most rugby.
But anyway, so like I say, to talk to Trevor White, captain of Gosforth's grammar school rugby team, was quite a smart thing to do. But I take no credit for thinking it through. So therefore I'd kind of carried my interest in traditional music through out of university and into my teaching. Like I say, I was brought up in Sunderland and my family were musical, but I had never heard of any of this clog dancing, sword dancing, Morris dancing. I'd never heard of the Northumbrian bagpipes. I knew nothing about the Tyneside tradition of song, except the songs that get into the school books, like "We Will Be the King Will" and that sort of thing. Yeah. So I discovered the culture of this region by leaving the region. I regard Leeds as being well outside, what I call the northeast of England, Northumbria. So anyway, fast forward 50 years from there, and I've continued to share traditional music, song and dance of this region.
And how popular do you think it is generally compared with those days at the moment?
Okay, I think I could, if I speak about ceilidh dancing, I would say, this is only my perspective, and I can't take other points of view that I've never stood in, but far more people can see ceilidh dancing as a fairly normal thing to do than they would in the 70s and 80s. It was quite unusual. If I look at, and I've kept records of the gigs I've done with my band over the years, the number of weddings we would play at in those days, in the 70s, was probably one a year, whereas now it's like 20. And it's not at all unusual for people to accept that ceilidh dancing is socially brilliant, and these are not people on the whole for whom ceilidh dancing is everything. There are some people like that who go to ceilidhs 3 or 4 times a week, or to barn dances or dance clubs. What I'm talking about is that going to a party where there's a ceilidh is a quite normal thing, and I think that's a healthy. Well, so yeah. I could go on about that as well. There's a lot of research into the mental and social health benefits of social dancing to live music.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that, because it is something that's that as you say is popular. But if you looked only at the mainstream media and the way that music appears in the media, you would think that it didn't exist.
Yes. Or it's like Morris dancing on the Two Ronnies, or the Morgan Wise show. That's fine, but that's where you used to find folk music being ridiculed, basically.
That's right. Yeah. My family, and as we were saying, lives in Somerset. My brother doesn't even know how to pronounce the word ceilidh.
Yeah.
Let alone go to one and know what to do. But my son, who's up in Scotland at university, he goes to ceilidhs about, I think he went to more than 2 in the past month, because in the winter that's what they do up there now. Yeah. It's their kind of social parties, isn't it?
Yeah. And so you were asking me about the benefits. But I'm just going to press pause on that, because I think an important thing I should say about the popularity. And popularity not in the sense of hitting the charts, but just being a thing that's enjoyed by a lot of people. Yeah. That's being pushed forward by a wonderful group of young people in the Newcastle area, who are now doing a thing every 4 or 6 weeks called the DIY ceilidh. It takes place in a nightclub atmosphere, and the music's quite rocky, sort of a quite heavy bass on it, which we don't have in our bands at all. And it's attracting loads and loads of people in their 20s, 30s. I mean, old men like me, I'm 75 now, I feel welcome. Everybody feels welcome. Yeah. It's one of the most inclusive, warmly receptive atmospheres I've ever come across. And it means when I'm not here, it'll still all be all right. Yeah. Me and my generation are not here. And I do, and let's come back to this word, it's healthy. It's fun, of course it's fun, but so some research was done in the later years of the 20th century in I think it was 6 universities in the New England area, the sort of Ivy League part of the USA. They were looking at activities that people engage in as they grow older, and in particular they were trying to identify activities that were mentally beneficial. And the way they defined that was which activities are most connected with delaying or putting off altogether the onset of Alzheimer's disease. That's what they were looking at. Do people who do crosswords walk in the country, do gardening, go cycling, have foreign holidays, read a lot, do crossword puzzles, whatever? How are these activities connected to better mental health in old age? And they discovered, to their surprise, that by far the strongest correlation between an activity and diminished likelihood of Alzheimer's disease was social dancing to live music. And both those adjectives are important. They're not talking about very formal kinds of dancing like ballroom or ballet. They're perfect, nothing against those, of course, but it was social dancing, and it was live music, not recorded music. And I've always felt that the difference between dancing to a live band and dancing to a recording is huge.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's useful to have recorded music for dancing or practicing and so on. But that reciprocal energy that flows between musicians and dancers is absolutely critical. And I always insist when I teach people music that they try and get some opportunities to play for dancing. If you play music for dancing, it makes you a better musician. Mm-hmm. Just, I could talk all day about that. So they found this, social dancing to live music, far outstripping everything else. I've got the statistics if you want to see them, I've got the article, in terms of it being good for people's mental health. So I always say, what I do, I love doing it, and I don't do it because of its benefits, but it actually has physical, psychological, emotional, social health benefits for everyone. So it's great. Let's keep people dancing. The academics who were doing this got interested in why. It's one thing showing it statistically, but then they looked at what are the reasons. And it's all to do with the fact that when you're doing ceilidh dancing, although there's a caller who tells you what to do, it's not very prescriptive. Mm-hmm. You say swing your partner, which means two people get hold of each other and swing round and round on the spot. It doesn't tell you how to hold each other, it doesn't tell you how to pose, it doesn't tell you how fast to go, how long to go. Swing your partner.
We'll remember this as we go. So, one hand to your partner, we're going to go 3 steps forward, or sort of 4 steps forward really. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're going to cross over. Jane's going to go in front of me, we're going to clap our hands. 1, 2, 3, clap. We're going to cross back, with me going in front of Jane. 1, 2, 3, clap. And then we're going to reverse to where we came. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the way it works. I will keep you right. We'll have some music. Yeah, we can't really stop. Off we go forwards. 1, 2, 3, 4, across. Reverse. Forwards and pass around. Balance forwards and back and conquer. Off we go again. 1, 2, 3, 4, across. 2, 3.
And when you're doing a ceilidh dance, actually, you're constantly making tiny but actual decisions. Pass your partner by. Do you go left or do you go right? You have a moment of eye contact with your partner and a decision is made wordlessly, for instance, etc., etc., etc. You're using your brain unconsciously, if you like. You're not thinking, I am making choices here. And the choices are not important ones in themselves. Doesn't matter whether you go left or right. But your mind is active, and like lots of kinds of exercise, it's best when you're not really thinking about it. When you get totally absorbed in a book, and you're not really conscious of the act of reading, that's when you're really involved in. I always used to say to students when I was a school teacher that the best part of your revision is when you lay off studying. You've got to do the studying, you've got to get the input, but then you go for a walk, or you have a meal, or you chat with your friends or something, and it's during that time, or when you're asleep, during that time, all that learning's being absorbed and sorted out by the little men that run around inside the computer of your brain and file everything. And so with this kind of decision making in dancing, you're not heavily conscious of having to make a choice. In some aspects of life, it's difficult to make choices. Here, it's just fun, and it doesn't matter. The thing I love about the folk music is that the standards of correctness are completely different from classical music. Like I say, my upbringing was in classical music, so I can actually, and I love it. I absolutely love orchestral music and all sorts of other kinds of classical music. Classical music. But there, the level of prescription by the composer and the conductor is very, very high. So if you play in an orchestra, you are following instructions. There's not that much scope for personal input, whereas when you're playing a ceilidh band, I won't say it doesn't matter what you play, but you decide.
There's kind of a parallel, isn't there, between the complexity of the music and the formality of engaging with it. So with classical music, if you go to the Glass House, for example, you wouldn't normally go dressed as you would to a rock gig.
Yeah,
You kind of
right.
dress up a little bit, even if you were relatively scruffy.
Well, things have improved in
Things are better than they used to be.
Yeah, it used to be absolutely, shirt and tie and suit.
That's how it used to,
But now it's better, but it's still true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued by the explanation that the scientists in New Hampshire came up with. It's a very scientific one, isn't it? It's something that the scientists can measure or think they can measure, and therefore they can correlate it with what they're observing. But actually, it kind of touches on something about music which I was trying to understand but never can, which is, what is it about music that is so it's more than appealing and it's more than engaging. It's kind of involving, isn't it?
Yeah.
Everybody. Well, I mean, there are presumably few people who don't enjoy music, but the vast majority of people like some kind of music.
Yeah.
Even if they don't practice it themselves, they'll listen to music and they will enjoy it. And people who are really enthusiastic, it really gets into their. I use the word soul, but I don't quite mean the word soul. It sort of overcomes them, doesn't it? So if you see people at a gig with a modern band and it's like a loud, fast band, they're all dancing. They're not standing and watching.
No, yeah.
And if it's a slower number, they're singing along as well these days.
Yeah.
In my day, when we used to go and watch rock concerts, we would all sit there in rapt attention at these gods on the stage and marvelling at their guitar solos. And after about 5 minutes, you think, well, maybe we should go to the bar now. Come back and they're still going. But these days, everybody's dancing and having fun. It's a link between some kind of intellectual understanding or comprehension of music and the physical drive to express it, isn't it?
Yeah, that's great. And what you're talking about is the fact that people are actively engaged, one way or another, actively engaged in the making of the music and not just passively receiving it. It can be wonderful just to let music absorb, wash over you and just to absorb it, but being actively engaged. I think this brings me back to why I think things like the Village Band are important, because people are making music. And I'm afraid to say, I mean, I've had some fantastic music teachers in my time, but I have come across a lot of school music teachers who are responsible for putting children off music for life and for making people of our generation think, I can't do music. And so I did, once I stopped school teaching, I started to work for a wonderful organisation called Folkworks, which became part of the Sage Gateshead, which is now the Glass House. So I did a lot of workshop work encouraging people to take part in music, and I saw that almost as my mission, like to help people get rid of this fear of making music, and I think folk music's brilliant for that, because there's no such thing as a wrong note. The Village Band, we learn by ear, we play by heart. It's not written down, you can't play a wrong note. Now that's putting it rather crudely. You can play better and worse, but there is much more freedom for personal input. And good folk tunes can be played by beginner players or by the world's greatest, and they come out differently, but it's still the same music. And I think people actively engaged in making music, like you say, we can use the word soul. We both know that that's a word capable of various interpretations, but it's kind of a part of your being you can't really talk about, or it was one of the great European composers who said, music says things that must be said, but cannot be said in words. And I quite like that. There is something when you're absorbing music making that simply touches parts of your being that can't be got at elsewhere. Music's not the only thing of which you can say that, but I think it's why I think music is really, really important.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to the 3 Times podcast. You can follow the Hexham Village Band on Facebook, where you'll find announcements of their ceilidhs. And if you'd like to know more about the positive effects of social dancing, the research David referred to was first published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2003. There's an easy to read summary of it on a website called Stanford Dance, which is full of interesting information about the benefits of dancing. I'll put a link in the show notes. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did recording it. Please remember to subscribe and tell your friends about the podcast.